Hello, everybody. Today we are starting the female reproductive system. So we just finished up the male system and meiosis. Now our next test will deal with the female reproductive system as well as the act of having a child, known as the birthing process. So the female system has parts just like the male system, but most of the female system is internal. So we have our ovaries, which we will talk a lot about. The uterus and uterine tubes. That's where fertilization is going to happen. They are known as the fallopian tubes. The uterus, which is a muscular organ, that is where the baby will develop. The vagina or birth canal, that may be another word you've seen. That's where the baby's going to come out of. And then there is some external genitalia, but nothing compared to what the male has externally. So this is a pretty simple picture. Your test will have a picture very, very, very similar to this. So the outside of mom's body would be right here. So the vagina or birth canal is where the baby will come out or where the male reproductive system will enter. Then there is this area known as the cervix, and that is basically a very narrow channel that will allow sperm to enter and will allow menstrual blood to leave, but pretty much wants to keep other things out. Your uterus is a hollow muscular organ that most of the time is pretty small. It doesn't need to be large, but it can. It's kind of like the way a balloon works. Then you have your fallopian tubes, or what you may see as uterine tubes, and there's going to be a lot going on in there, which we'll talk about, and the ovaries, which are the female gonads. That is where estrogen and things like progesterone will be produced, as well as the actual gamete or eggs. And you can see where it's located, and it's in the lower abdomen area of a female. This is a side view, and you will not be responsible for the side view, but I just wanted you to see one thing in that the uterus, again, is fairly small when there's no baby in it, and it sits on top of your bladder. So that's your bladder. And what happens when females are pregnant, when this uterus obviously has a baby in it, there's a lot of pressure on a female's bladder. So on top of the fact that mom is probably drinking more water, the pressure will make her feel like, to go to the bathroom a lot. Again, here's your vagina or birth canal. That's your entrance to the outside. And again, we'll talk a lot more about that as we go. The ovaries themselves, we'll see this picture twice in here, but I just want you to see that it's sort of kind of like an egg factory, but it's not like sperm where males will make millions of them a month. A female will produce one functioning egg, well, assuming she's doesn't come from both ovaries for fraternal twins, but will make one functioning egg. So it's going to start out as a primary follicle. And what it's going to do over the course of the next couple of weeks is it's going to develop. And it's going to develop into what is known as the secondary oocyte. That's what's going to be released, otherwise known as the soon-to-be egg that has the ability to be fertilized. The process is known as ovulation. We'll talk more about that. And then the leftover kind of membrane there is going to turn into what's known as the corpus luteum, which is also going to be very important in the production of a hormone known as progesterone. Then it will degenerate, and then the process will start. And this takes about a month to do this, and this is some of the events in the menstrual cycle, which we'll talk about. So the ovary it's like a sac-like structure. Once again, it is found within a follicle, and the oocyte, or the egg, is going to be the major production thing that we care about. As for the menstrual cycle, it's about a 28-day cycle, assuming that everything is functioning okay, meaning you don't have any underlying health issues or you're not stressed out. So the average is about 28 days, and plus or minus. Here, this will happen after a female reaches sexual maturity and will continue until she reaches menopause. After that, this process will stop. All of the reproductive cells that the female has or will release over the course of her life, she's actually born with. So the day you came out of your mom, ladies, you had all of the eggs that are going to mature into a mature egg each month. And again, that starts after puberty. Puberty and the time it starts is different for every female. This chart you will have to be familiar with, and it's about a month's worth of time. So you can see here day 0 up to day 28. So it's, like I said, about a month. And there's a lot of things going on here. We have an overall body temperature chart here, and it's about, plus or minus 1 degree Celsius. So that's not so much going on there. And you can see this has a lot of things all going on at the same time. So in the first few days of the cycle, let's say the first 2 weeks or so, both of these hormones, LH and FSH, are reasonably flat. Nothing's really going on there. Body temperature's holding on a little bit above 36 Celsius, and you can see the follicle is growing like in that last picture that I showed you. Your this is estrogen. It's a fancy way of saying it. Your estrogen level is going to start to rise over that first 2 weeks, and it's going to peak just before that dotted line. That dotted line is on the 14th day of the cycle, known as ovulation. That's when the egg gets released. On that day, your LH and FSH are going to spike. Your body temperature is going to rise a little bit, and you're going to release an egg. Now, over the course of this, and this is where a lot of people kind of mess this up, this menses, or what you would refer to as your period, that happens in the beginning of the cycle. So if you notice, that's day 0 to about, let's say day 4 or 5. Everyone's a little bit different. So that's getting rid of the lining you didn't need if you're not pregnant. Over the next about 3 weeks, the internal lining of the uterus builds and builds and builds. It gets thicker and more vascular, just in case an egg is fertilized that needs to implant. After that ovulation, the FSH and LH drop, so that's fine. Remember I talked about that corpus luteum? That corpus luteum forms after the egg is released. Well, that's going to signal the body to produce some progesterone. Also, your estrogen levels are going to rise again. Now, during this time, in this window right here, it is possible for an egg to get fertilized, and that fertilized egg implant itself in the inner lining of the uterus. In the event that you're getting close to that 28th day and the egg has not implanted, maybe you didn't have sex, maybe you had protected sex, maybe you were on birth control, whatever. At this point now, the body says, all right, we're not pregnant. Now, what makes this chart a little bit confusing is you see this menses, or this menstrual cycle, or your period. It looks like it happens at the beginning and the end, but don't be fooled, because this is now a reset. This is the next month. So this dot right there, that dotted line, this is the next month. Okay, so be careful on that. And that's the cycle that happens with the hormones and the building of the uterine lining. Here again is another kind of graphic. There's your period, beginning. There is your estrogen and your progesterone are kind of doing their thing. Your ovulation will happen right here. That's where your FSH and your LH will spike. Your progesterone is going to be highest after ovulation. Your estrogen level rises a little bit. In the event that you are not pregnant, there's the 28th day of the cycle. All levels drop, and then you will have your period. So that's thanks to Kristen G, who put this on her project, and I stole it. So thank you. Okay, hormonal and structural changes. So in addition to the maturation of the follicle, and that's what happens in the first couple of days of the cycle, your estrogen levels are going to rise just before ovulation, which we saw. Your LH and your FSH are going to spike on day 14. And finally, you're going to release the egg, known as ovulation. Now be careful. This is the 14th day of the cycle, not the 14th day of the month. So tomorrow is May 14th. That doesn't mean every single female is going to ovulate tomorrow. It's the 14th day of the cycle, so don't be fooled by that. Again, here's another graph. I keep on showing you the same thing over and over again, but again, you have to know it. After ovulation, that means you have released the egg. The egg is now moving its way down the fallopian tube on its way to the uterus. The progesterone levels are going to rise. And the reason why they rise is in the event that sperm is there, and in the event the egg does get fertilized, the progesterone helps to kind of prepare for this possible implantation. Not saying it's guaranteed, but it helps. The inner lining of the uterus is known as the endometrium. Now, if you remember from the chart, over this course of time, right after ovulation, your uterine lining is still thickening up. It's still becoming more vascular. And that is in case the egg does implant itself. It's going to need a nutrient supply. It cannot live by itself. In the event that you did not have sex, there is no sperm handy, or you just simply did not release an egg because of birth control, the egg is not fertilized or not there. The body's like, okay, I guess we're not pregnant. The inner uterine lining, that endometrium, gets shed, and that is when you have your period. And again, that lasts for a couple of days, then you reset the cycle. Here is, again, the building. So there's when you have your period. Here you can see the lining is very thin, thicker, not pregnant. Shed it, build, not pregnant, shed it, build. Now, in the event that you are pregnant, which we will talk about in the next section, then there's a whole bunch of other changes that happen. But this is if you are not pregnant. Now, as for the ovarian follicle, you have some stages. Primary usually means first in the world of things. So that's going to happen first. And since it's first, it's going to be immature. And if you remember the picture that I drew earlier, it was growing. Then finally, the secondary follicle. Everything is now mature and it's ready to be released. And again, this takes a few days for this to happen. The act of ovulation, which happens on day 14, you know you're going to see that question coming up. That's when you release the egg into the fallopian tubes. This whole process is a 28-day cycle, but remember, ovulation happens on the 14th day of that cycle, literally smack in the middle of it. After it is released, you have this little kind of, looks like a flower, sometimes they draw it. It's the corpus luteum. That is again going to release the progesterone in case you are pregnant. So this cycle goes on and on and on. Now for ladies, obviously this is part of your life. For some of the guys in the class, they really don't know what's going on with this yet. But again, if you get into a serious relationship or when you get married, this is going to be a big deal. Where it all begins, once again, all of the eggs a female has, she's born with. Again, they're not mature, but she will develop one every month. And during her reproductive years, this will happen, again, every 28 days, and it will stop at something called menopause. Now, this here, I'm just actually going to skip right over this because you don't need it, but there's a whole bunch of steps and along the way, and it all happens even when you're in the embryonic stage. But again, we're just going to skip over this one. There will be no questions on your test on this, I promise. Now, the primary follicle, again, that is a big deal. That's going to be the beginning of the cycle, and it will go through its meiosis, and you'll release an egg. And this will happen when a female becomes sexually mature. At sexual maturity, and again, this is 13, 14, 15, every female is a little bit different, but somewhere around there, you have a small number of these primary oocytes, and each month they will mature and they will complete their meiotic division, and you need the help of your FSH, or your follicle stimulating hormone, and sometimes they will refer to that soon to be egg or the primary follicle. That's why you have follicle stimulating hormone, gets it going. It is going to have a protective coat, which is going to come in handy. The sperm is going to have to work very hard to get through that. It's going to have ribosomes. It's going to have all of the fats, all of the cytoplasm, all of the mitochondria. It's going to have everything it needs, because when the sperm comes in, the sperm only brings DNA. The egg has everything else. So when you remember from meiosis, let's say that this is a female, your original cell, your oogonium, has 46 chromosomes. By the time you're done, these are only going to have 23 chromosomes each. But I've been going on and on to say that a female only produces one egg per month. One functioning egg. These three are called polar bodies. Now, once again, these things are not going to become eggs. Notice how small they are. So they're out. You still need to produce them for the numbers, but you will only produce your one egg that will be released. The other three are polar bodies. And again, this happens every 28 days during your reproductive life. And Here is just another picture, and this is our last slide for this section. You can see here that 3 of them go on to become polar bodies. Whoop, there. And then 1 will mature as it goes, gets released on day 14. Then you go to your corpus luteum and start all over again. 14-day cycle, but again, these are your polar bodies. You don't need those. So that is our first part, and there'll be just a couple of questions to go along with this because I know you finished up your test this week, and I'll see you soon for the rest of the female reproductive system.